Hi guys, and welcome to another Salient Process, Automation Anywhere and BPM technical tutorial. In this edition, we're going to fill in some blanks that we left unanswered in a previous video. The previous video spoke about driving BPM-based coaches, human services, and we started that story by saying that we somehow magically obtained the URL to be able to launch the human service. So in this story, in this edition, in this video, we're going to talk about how we get that URL. So here's the high-level story, and it's not rocket science, it's quite elegant. The idea is that the BPM server provides a set of REST requests. REST services. So if your BPM server has human tasks associated with it, we can perform REST calls to the BPM server to interrogate that server. Now, one of those, or at least one of those, REST API calls allows us to search for tasks that we might be interested in. For example, we can search for tasks with a given name, or tasks which are claimed or unclaimed, and certainly tasks that we are eligible to run on. So by executing that query, we get back a list of tasks. Now, for any given task, each task has a unique task identifier. Once we know the task identifier of the task that we want to work on, there's another REST API which, given the task identifier, will return us the URL that we can use to launch that particular task. And that's the answer to the story. So let's look and see what we did in Automation Anywhere in order to make that work. So here's my script, and I've added comment lines between each script, so it's about 7 lines of executable logic here. And the first command is we make a REST request from Automation Anywhere. So let me open this up. And in the REST request, we make the, it looks kind of intimidating, but this is the REST request as documented in the BPM manuals, and we make a REST request to get a list of all of the tasks. Now I've hard-coded my user ID and password here, but those could be provided as parameters in this environment. Now, using the Automation Anywhere mechanism, we can send a request and see what the response looks like, and we find that the response is a JSON document. So to start our story here, we make a REST request, and in this data we get back the task ID of tasks that we can launch, and the response comes back as JSON. Now, Automation Anywhere, unfortunately, doesn't support JSON. It doesn't have anything like first-class parsing capabilities for JSON. However, those good guys at IBM have produced a MetaBot, which is a plugin to Automation Anywhere, which provides JSON parsing. So we can get that from the IBM GitLab repository, and once installed we can then drag and drop our JSON component in here, and we get a list of the different commands that are supported in that JSON MetaBot. One of them, called getPropertyValue, takes as input a JSON string, which is the output from the previous REST command, and then we get to specify JSON path to be able to identify which field in the data we're interested in. So by parsing the REST request, REST response that comes back from BPM, we can now extract certain fields. And if we look here, we extract the TKIID. In fact, that's all we need. I think the rest of them are just commentary, but I also extract the name of the task and the process app. But all I'm using is the TKIIDs. I just realized that I don't actually need those. Now that we've got the TKIID, the task IID, I then make another REST request, but this time the REST request contains a variable as part of the REST request URL path. That's what I wanted to say, the URL path. So it passes in the toolkit ID and the response from that. We save in a variable called launch URL JSON. Now the response is itself a JSON structure, so we have to parse the return JSON structure, which came back out of the call to BPM to retrieve the URL, and now we have the URL exactly as we want it, a string which contains the URL. So for example, if I now run, and then lastly we display the value. So if I switch on debugging and say run, and it's going to step through this process very quickly. So it's running it, it's connecting to BPM, it's retrieved the data, it's parsing the data, and we end up with my text which says we have a URL. So let me grab this URL, copy it into the clipboard. Let's bring up a browser. Easier said than done. Let me find my browser screens. There we go. Let me bring in a browser. Let me paste in that URL, run it, and we arrive at a login screen, which is where we started yesterday. So, in the previous video rather. So what we can now do is we can now log in, and we're brought to that particular tasks screen. So let's review again. In this story, we are using REST to retrieve the list of tasks. This allows us to search very efficiently for the list of tasks we're interested in. We then can retrieve from the JSON returned by that task the task ID, and in this case we've got the JSON data returned, and I'm asking for the first task ID. I'm saving it in a local variable called task ID. And then later on I make another REST request, this time to get the URL that is to launch that particular task. That comes back in a variable which I'm calling launch URL JSON. And then finally from launch URL JSON I extract the URL value from that JSON response, and now we have the JSON string which I echo in a task here. And if we run it one more time just to see it, again it takes a few seconds here because I'm running with debug on, so we can step through it. It runs, it runs, it runs, it runs, it runs, and there we see the URL which was determined by BPM that would be able to be invoked that would launch that particular task. Now, why am I using REST services here? Well, REST services are super efficient, but there's a deeper reason. And that is that if I wasn't going to use REST services, then what I would be doing would be bringing up IBM BPM Process Portal and then trying to drive Process Portal in the same fashion a user would in order to find a task. And I found that tricky. I haven't been able to drive a repeating list in a web page such as what that which Process Portal provides in a nice fashion through Automation Anywhere. And this JSON service, this REST service, this can always be written once and then encapsulated either in a metabot or a service task, a utility task, and then just leveraged from other higher level tasks such as those that a business user might create. Alright, I hope you found this useful, and I look forward to making more of these technical tutorials in the future. Thanks for now. Bye-bye.